We all knew it was coming, this scare campaign surrounding nuclear energy. The government was always going to try and make us afraid of this technology. Well, the scare campaign has been called out by a 17-year-old. Will Shackel is the founder of Nuclear for Australia. Will, you always knew this was coming, didn't you?
I did, and I think it's really sad that we're seeing it actually play out. The Prime Minister a few days ago posted on social media a post with pictures of scenic locations around Australia, and said these are the locations that are at threat of a nuclear power reactor in their backyard. And I think it's a terrible precedent that he's setting involving himself in this nuclear fear campaign.
Well, I suppose that was all they had left, though, because it started with, firstly, nuclear, the technology doesn't exist. Well, we know it does. It takes too long to build. Well, that's been debunked by several experts. It's too expensive. Well, again, depending on how you do the sums, you can make anything look too expensive. But the fear campaign around the danger of nuclear power, I think, is probably the most insidious thing to come out of this because, nuclear power is used almost all over the world with very, very little fallout. And when you think about some of the nuclear disasters that have happened through history, the only one that actually hurt anybody was Chernobyl. And, well, there's a whole bunch of reasons for that, and none of them to do with nuclear power.
Well, look, at the end of the day, nuclear energy is an incredibly safe energy source. It's actually the second safest energy source, including those events. And obviously, since the reactor designs are completely different from what you'd be seeing at a Chernobyl, which obviously was also coupled with the fact that it was under the management of the Soviets.
Exactly.
And they mismanaged the operation of that reactor. But I think the most important thing here is that I think everyone's always known that these politicians, they might say publicly that their concerns about nuclear power just isolated to the fact that, it apparently costs too much and takes too long to build. But in reality, they're masking a deeper ideological opposition they have to their technology, which they know wouldn't stack up in a public forum. And that's because they don't think it's safe. They think that, nuclear waste is still, screen goo, like in The Simpsons. And I don't think our politicians actually understand the facts about nuclear power. So what they're currently doing is they're spreading a fear campaign about nuclear power, which is just blatant misinformation. Even there's, another example, there was a politician, Dan Repicoli, the member for the Hunter.
Yep.
And obviously that's been a community which has been identified where a nuclear power plant could go to replace the coal-fired power station there. He was posting AI-generated images of a fisherman outside a nuclear power plant catching a three-eyed fish.
Well, if I can just point something out to you that you might not be aware of, but I spent quite a bit of time in the town where those coal-fired power stations are. The locals there would be crying out for a nuclear power station if the option was there. And the water, there's a lake next to the coal-fired power station that you can't swim in or can't fish in already because it's polluted.
100%. And the thing about it is, I've obviously been to a few communities. I went up to Mount Isa late last year and visited them. They want a nuclear power reactor because it's not just about electricity. This is also about energy and heat-intensive industry being able to operate, and they can't do it with renewables alone. That's why they're crying out for nuclear. And I think for those communities, it's really disappointing that those politicians are ruling them out. The not in my backyard argument just simply doesn't stack up when you've got things like small modular reactors, when you've got micro reactors, when you've got large reactors, and all of those technologies are safe. But at the end of the day, I think this fear campaign is one of the most harmful things.
Do you think people are falling for it, though?
I hope they're not, and I don't think they are. You might have seen in the most recent Lowy poll, it found that 60% of Australians support nuclear power, including a majority of Labor voters. So something's clearly not stacking up where the politicians are saying one thing, but their voters think a different thing. And I think what will end up happening is that whilst, they might think that this fear campaign will work in the short term and win them some votes in the election by deceiving people, in the long term it's going to have disastrous effects for this country. And I think people will turn against it when they realise the facts. I'm currently sharing facts through our campaign, Nuclear for Australia. But I think the biggest harm will be the risk to our global reputation, which comes from this nuclear fear campaign. And especially in terms of AUKUS, I would really ask if those politicians who are behind this campaign, like our Prime Minister and Chris Bowen, have considered the implications on the AUKUS submarine agreement between the UK and the US, because if they knew what they were currently, their messaging around nuclear science and how they're undermining trust in nuclear science and nuclear reactors, which will obviously be in those submarines, I think they would be very, very concerned. So I think it's much bigger than this nuclear power debate, and I hope those politicians start listening to the facts and the science.
Good on you, Will. Appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you.
Will Shackel, the founder of Nuclear for Australia. Look, when a 17-year-old makes more sense than the energy minister and the prime minister, you got to say we've got a big problem in this country, don't you?